This video focuses on the case of New York Times versus United States, and this is from 1971. So this is generally nicknamed the Pentagon Papers case. President Nixon is the president at the time, and his administration was attempting to prevent the New York Times and the Washington Post from publishing materials that belonged to a classified Defense Department study that was basically examining the United States government's actions in Vietnam. And what was published, these classified documents, basically contradicted a lot of what the government was saying about what was happening in Vietnam and what had been done like previously. So it obviously makes the Nixon administration look pretty bad. So one of the things that the Nixon administration tried to do was get a court order that would prevent the New York Times from publishing these classified documents that contradicted what the government had said in the past. This is known as prior restraint. We had talked about this in the unit. So when the government goes to a court and tries to get somebody to be stopped from publishing something, that's called prior restraint. So the question in this case is, could the government stop the New York Times and the Washington Post from publishing what became known as the Pentagon Papers, right? And this is a First Amendment, obviously freedom of the press case. And the answer was no. That ultimately prior restraint is generally not tolerated unless national security is at risk, which the Supreme Court decided in this case that it wasn't. So again, we talked about prior restraint is stopping something from being published, right? That's what the Nixon administration is asking the Supreme Court to grant is prior restraint, prevent the New York Times from publishing these damaging documents, right? But the Supreme Court basically says the government couldn't stop the publication of these papers because they couldn't prove that national security was at risk. Sure, it makes the Nixon administration look bad, but like, is it putting the country in danger? And if it can't be proven to do so, then the Supreme Court's going to go ahead and allow this to be published, which is what they did in this case.